Class, World War I is going to be a war infamous for its duration, horrors, and also something called stalemate. Wars are often unpredictable at best. Germany thought, we're going to quickly take out Russia and France, only to find that they could not. Following the First Battle of Marne, to save Paris from the German invasion, a stalemate ensues. But they did save Paris from invasion of the Germans, right? This time they do. Not so in World War II. Class, the Battle of the Marne is often referred to as the Taxi de la Marne. France is going to use taxis to transport soldiers to the front line. Hey, whatever works, that's what we're going to do. And they had that attitude throughout the war. Trenches will be dug in by both sides on the Western Front, and it's going to go from the English Channel to the Swiss Alps. You can still see some of these trenches today. It's just really what I would call a collision of people snared up in a vast siege. No one had ever seen anything like this. No one would ever see anything like this again. Troops are going to live in holes dug in the ground, guarded by machine guns, separated from each other by no man's land. It's filled with barbed wire. Life in the trenches, class, proved to be tedious, damp, wet, muddy, dirty, and disease-ridden for the soldiers on both sides. They're going to live with countless bodies of dead men, rats, and waste. And many of them are going to live there for the duration of the war if they survive. So by 1915, the war had grown into a stalemate. No side moved more than a few miles at any given time. The Battle of Ypres in 1915 and the Battle of Somme in 1916 saw hundreds of thousands of casualties with very little gain from either side. Millions of young men sacrificed in the search of a breakthrough. Who's going to win this war? Somme, class, is one of the bloodiest military operations ever recorded in history. The Battle of Verdun. This is the longest battle in history ever recorded, lasting from February to December of 1916. Yes, I said nearly 1 year. And 250,000 men are going to be killed, 500,000 wounded. Listen, 40 million artillery shells are exchanged by both sides, leaving endless fields of shell craters still visible today. Really, Verdun and Somme represent the horrors of World War I. And for what? The battle lines virtually stayed the same throughout the duration of the war. But by February of 1917, something's going to happen. Russia's going to be out due to a revolution in their country. But unfortunately, the war's going to continue to grind on, and the Allies, have just lost an important source of soldiers. And so what are they going to do now? As I mentioned, barbed wire is creating this virtual no man's land between trenches. Barbed wire is a relatively new invention, and this is going to prove to be deadly. These trenches are going to be guarded by these new and improved machine guns. Class, I've read accounts of soldiers who would actually go into this no man's land in order to commit suicide. Now, one of the most horrific new weapons that I want to talk about proved to be poisonous gas. This is the first time gas is going to be used in wartime. And in 1915, a chemist by the name of Fritz Haber, interestingly, he was also a Nobel Peace Prize winner from earlier. He invented poisonous gas and is going to use it as a war weapon. But class, the Allies are going to catch on and invent gas masks. It takes a little while, but they develop some gas masks for their soldiers and for their animals. They have dogs, war dogs, they have war horses. Besides, thankfully for them, the wind often blew in the wrong way, and when the Germans would set off the poisonous gas, it would often come back onto their own troops. Ironically, I want to point this out, the chemist who invented this gas was Jewish. And this poison he invented is going to be used by Hitler to murder millions of Jews in the Holocaust during World War II. So it's very tragic. Tanks, also a new invention for the war. They're pretty good on open fields, something a little different, but they're not much good at this time in rocky terrain or forested terrain. Airplanes class are going to be used for the first time in small numbers in World War I, mainly by the Germans. As well as, again, we still have old-fashioned blimps, balloons. Another new invention is going to be U-boats or submarines. And this is really going to give Germany an advantage in the beginning of the war until Britain and France are going to find some creative ways to destroy them. The fighting is going to continue for 4 long years, and this high death toll in World War I is going to force governments to continue to enlist more and more men. 70 million men in all will serve during World War I. Now, over half, really, of enlisted men are going to be killed, injured, taken prisoner, or unaccounted for. It's just tremendous. And this mass mobilization and total war is going to have some unintended consequences, like the undermining of traditional gender roles. So, prior to this time, we're coming out of the Victorian era, and we're going to see something really unique take place during World War I, and that is thousands of women are going to serve in different roles. Some of them will serve in auxiliary units and near or at the front lines, not necessarily as soldiers. Women are going to replace men in occupations on the home front. It doesn't mean that they're there to stay forever, but after the war ends, governments are going to move pretty quickly to remove women from the jobs they took after men, finally go home after the war. Now listen, I want to tell you this, really no field of endeavor was left untouched by a woman's hands. They built ships, aircraft, tanks, they made munitions, they drove trains and buses, and they became mechanics. They also are working as nurses, ambulance drivers, and in military support roles. They buried the dead, class. They delivered coal. They delivered milk. There were women police auxiliaries. There were 50,000 women who joined the Secret Service in France and Great Britain. Women are now becoming very visible in society. They're not hidden at home. And we're going to see, this is going to happen in Germany too. Women are working in places like Krupp Armaments Works. Of course, women are never going to make the same wage as male workers, but it's going to change the lives of many women. In larger numbers, women are going to take and keep jobs outside of the home after the war. They're going to have their own apartments and show their independence in public, like wearing shorter dresses, adopting new hairstyles, wearing makeup, throwing out the girdles, and smoking. So after war, the age of the flapper is going to arise, and that's going to be a worldwide phenomenon, even in the United States as well. But the lines during World War I are really blurred between civilian and soldiers. Horrors are going to reach around the world. For example, one account your textbook list is the Ottoman forces. Remember the Ottoman Empire, class? They massacred and deported about 1 million ethnic Armenians, saying, well, they're cooperating with the Russians. No, they were not. Britain and France, they're going to conscript millions of soldiers, class, from their colonial eras. They're going to take them from their homes. They're going to bring in troops from Asia and Africa, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, force them to fight and die on the bloody battlefields. This is women in the war effort and working in a factory. So how's it all going to come to an end? Now, up until this point, the United States had stayed neutral. According to them, they were considered themselves isolationists. But their entry into the war in late 1917 is going to tip the balance in the favor of the Allies. They begin to win battles thanks to the incredible fighting spirit of the doughboys, as they were called. They kind of push in a new wave of energy, if you will. Now, what brought us into the war? First of all, Germany began to sink American merchant ships again. They promised, we're not going to attack U.S. ships. They really didn't want the United States in the war, but they just couldn't help themselves. And eventually they sank a ship called the Lusitania. It kind of became a rally cry for those who wanted to enter the war in the United States. There were Americans on board that went down with this ship. Now, there was also some weapons that we were sending to our allies. Germany didn't have to know that, but the United States was beginning to see the need to support the wartime effort for our allies. Then another event took place. The Zimmermann telegram became public. Zimmermann was the Secretary of State of German Foreign Affairs, and he wrote a telegram to Mexico, and he said, if in exchange for your help in this war, help us attack the United States, we will help you regain your lost territories to the United States. If you know much about American history, the United States had taken half of Mexico's landmass during the Mexican Wars that preceded the Civil War. How dare they do this? This really set the United States on fire. So we joined the war, and we're going to push and tilt the war to the Allies' win. Now, German soldiers, as well as the Allied soldiers, but particularly German soldiers, are facing now, by the end of the war, widespread hunger. The flu has spread through Europe. Class, I hate to say it, but the United States actually brought it there. But the flu spread through Europe. Defeat was imminent, and they were experiencing a lot of internal problems at home. They were really weakening, and unfortunately, Germany was forcing enlistment of young boys around the age of 15 years old up to 70-year-old men. So the propaganda was hard at work in Germany, class. I mentioned to you, they're using propaganda. The citizens in Germany were convinced they were winning this war up until almost the day that it was over. And so propaganda was working there too, and they were all behind this wartime effort. In the end, Kaiser Wilhelm II ultimately fled the country. The German Empire became the German Republic. Tsar Nicholas was murdered in the Russian Revolution. Austria-Hungary is going to be dissolved into several new nations. The Ottoman Empire finally collapses. And the victors are going to impose a punitive peace on Germany at the peace conference held in the Palace of Versailles in 1919. They would pay, Germany would be forced to pay the Allies about $9 million. Class, I think they just finished paying it back too in the 1980s or 90s, something like that. Now, over the objections of American President Woodrow Wilson and his 14 points, the treaty assigned to Germany sole blame for the war and these harsh reparations. Wilson had really hoped for a more harmonious and peaceful settlement. But ultimately his ideas and his 14 points for a League of Nations and self-determination did see, some success in maintaining peace in the world for a few years. The United States did not really support the League of Nations, but eventually, class, this is going to turn into the United Nations that we know about today. 10 million died during the war. 20 million forever maimed. Many came home blinded, missing body parts, and mentally broken. The Imperial Germany, the largest and most prosperous nation in the Western Europe, is going to emerge as an emaciated, impoverished, hate-filled loser. The victors are going to emerge as impoverished, hate-filled winners. At least the Britons and the French do. And then Russia is going to succumb to a radical takeover by the communists, and we know where that's going to lead the world. The United States stock market is going to crash in 1929, further complicating worldwide economic recoveries. Remember, it's not just American depression, it's worldwide. And also after the war, some of the areas being occupied by colonial rule are going to start fighting for their independence, like the peaceful revolution led by Gandhi in India. Many of them were successful. Now, class, if you want to know more about World War I, let me suggest a book. Send the Alabamians, World War I Fighters in the Rainbow Division by Nimrod Fraser. Alabama sent troops to France during World War I, class. They still love us over there for saving their towns. I had the privilege of taking a World War I battle site tour during the 100th anniversary of some of these battles that we fought in France this past summer in 2018. Our boys really served bravely and fought and died alongside the French brothers during the Battle of Bellewood, Chateau Thierry, and many others. But the most incredible battle, class, was the Battle of the Croix Rouge Farm. Read about it in this awesome book. Now, the rise in power of an injured, he was blinded at one time, class, and mentally and physically deranged World War I veteran Adolf Hitler in Germany is ultimately going to lead us into the biggest and deadliest war the world has ever seen. More on that next time. As usual, class, keep in touch.